Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Paul Van Valen. I'll reintroduce myself in a minute. We have just a minute to go. I thought that I might just start the dead air time by going through my day. I woke at, I don't know, sometime 7-ish, which is late for me. I went to bed early. I'm sleeping well, more than normal. And in part, that's the result of the fatigue that we will all be feeling soon if we are not feeling it already. Fatigue is part of going through cumulative stress. So I get up, I go out and watch a bit of the news, and I tune in. I'm very interested in what's going on with the stimulus package, as most of you are. I try not to obsess about that stuff. So I give myself a short period of time sitting in a chair watching that. I take my blood pressure every morning and night. I've noticed as I age, that's a barometer for stress, and I'm fine with that. I'm both encouraged and anxious by hearing about the stimulus package coming to conclusion. Anxious because I'm wondering how many people who really need it will even figure out how to get it. And so we're going to talk today about charity. We're going to talk about giving what you have. We're going to talk about who you are and the fluidity of our identity. Who you are and how you perceive yourself is affected by all kinds of things. So we're going to talk about that. So we now are at noon. I was just telling little bits about myself to fill the dead air time, waiting for 12 o'clock to strike. My name is Paul Van Valen. I'm a psychologist in Southeast Virginia. I founded Eden Counseling and Consulting in 1995. I co-founded Van Valen Assessment and Consulting last year. Eden Leaders Institute was founded in 1996. And we are all about helping people discover who they really are and helping them live accordingly. So that's our topic for today. I got kind of emotional today as I was preparing for this, thinking about the kinds of things I could talk about, always trying to determine what should I talk about, prayerfully considering what should we talk about today. There's so much to talk about. And so and thank you for coming and waving, folks. Great to see you. Shirley, Stephen, Michelle. There was a children's program where, I think her name was Shirley. She used to look through an imaginary mirror and call out names, and you felt like, oh, she's watching me. We can actually really do that now. So Sam, my neighbor's there. Good to see you. Ben. So thank you for showing up. Part of what I'm going to be doing with this series is just seeing if it is valued. So I've been really touched by some of your comments, those of you that have been willing to share some personal reflection after we finished. That's the kind of thing that lets me know this is worth doing. I've been thinking a lot about charity. I've been opening up my personal Facebook page to a much broader group of people. Anyone that seems to be having faith, that is seeking friendship, I'm giving it. Of course, some of those things may be fake. There are people that do try to scam and so forth. Now, fortunately, I'm not a man of great financial means. I say fortunately because it would be challenging for me to have to assess of all the requests where I would be spending money. So since I don't have great funds, I'm sharing what I have, which is intellectual capital. I have some of that, and I'm willing to share it freely. And so that's what this is all about. A ministry that I posted about that y'all could consider is if you figure out how to get your $1,200, or if you're a small business and you figure out how to get that loan, would you be willing to share that expertise through social media? Huge, huge value, especially with me. If you figure out how to do this, send me the information. I have 2 small businesses that, we're hoping make it. And I'm grateful I can work from home. Everything that we do is now telehealth. The industry has allowed this to happen. We can do it by phone call. So I'm extremely grateful for that. However, given it's kind of ironic, as stress increases, people don't have the time to do the therapy, right? So this is a complex situation we're in. So I wanted to start with a verse. I actually took a little time and pulled a couple things I want to share with you. But I found that, like the first one I gave Monday, I didn't think about it at all. Just got up, talked. The second one I thought about a little bit. Today I thought about for 20 minutes. And now I'm more confused than ever about what I should talk about. So let's start with this. James 1:27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Now, this is not a sermon. I am not a theologian, but any one of us could get up and preach about whatever we choose to. But this came to mind as I was reflecting on the current need in our communities and in the world. We have people who are in distress, look after widows and orphans in their distress, and keep oneself from being polluted by the world. So it's really easy to be affected by media. Very clearly, this week, you won't find fresh chicken in my neighborhood. You know, the whole toilet paper thing's still going on. My neighbor Sam found some, so you all can raid his house for that. So we're in a time where it's really important. The Bible talks a lot about charity. It talks a lot about caring for each other, bearing one another's burdens. And some people are going to have real economic burdens. I have been reminding myself in my most difficult times, and I've had several, of Paul's words to Timothy where he says, if we have a shirt on our back and food in our stomach, we will be content. Now, I have to work at that. He also says in Philippians 4, I've learned to be content in all things. And we know that Paul was shipwrecked, abandoned, left for dead, stoned, thrown in prison, and eventually executed. And so somehow he proclaims, in all situations, I've learned to be content. That same chapter talks about anxiety, how to think about positive things, and that through Christ I can do all things. So this is Philippians 4 again, this rich chapter. So I believe God has been working on me to practice being content in all things by throwing some rocks at me at times, or letting others throw rocks at me at times. And that may be your situation as well. I think this COVID-19 virus is, we're all getting rocks thrown at us. And how are we going to respond to this? Are we going to be self-protective? Are we going to, and please don't misunderstand me. We have to be careful. We have to practice social distancing. But for example, this is just a couple names. James Kasambi. These are people on Facebook. Amos Simiyu, Simiyu. They're in Kenya, and they have. We've been just beginning to correspond, and they have real needs. All the third world developing nations, the former Eastern European bloc, continent of Africa, South America, as well as across the street, there are significant needs, and we are obligated, according to Scripture, to at least consider what is required of me. And so as I hear about these financial needs, we don't have enough food, we have no medicine, we have no medical care all over the world, I can't meet that need financially. I can encourage all of us to consider, are we being called to share? You know, hoarding is a mentality that is, I have to have it all and keep it for me. And I honestly do keep all my I have food store and I have stuff all the time because we live in hurricane, area. And we all know that if we aren't prepared in advance, that there will be hoarding of, in our area, it's batteries and water, and bottled water, because sometimes a hurricane can mess up the public utilities, and you really do need to have at least a bathtub full of clean water that you can boil, right? But what happens is all the shelves get cleared off of bread, perishable items and that sort of thing. But if you're prepared in advance, if you've been wise, and there's a lot of scripture about this, a lot of metaphor about being ready for the bridegroom, then you already have stuff. And you may even have extra. So surplus is anything I'm going to go real stark on this. Surplus is anything I don't need today. Now, I obviously have more stuff than I need today. But this is just a mentality to consider. What do I have to share? So one of my action steps is going to be to slip a note in all my neighbors' mailboxes. If you run short of stuff, let me know. And I will attempt to be generous. I'm offering the same thing to my staff. I'm offering my time to you all. I can't ship most of you a roll of toilet paper, but I have opened up my my Facebook account, and it's starting to get kind of deluged. I'm attempting to respond to every comment and request. That may become impossible, but for the time being, I'm keeping up with it, as well as doing my full-time work and managing my household. So, charity, very, very important. I ask myself, am I a charitable person? Now, in the flesh, the answer would be no, I am not. I am a human, right? So charity is a divine calling that we all have to give. So my topic title was, who am I, or who are you when your world is shaken? And I've had the privilege of going into shaken communities, regions, and my work is almost always with someone whose personal, private world has been shaken. Who am I? So I'm going to suggest a little exercise for you. And if you feel like posting it, it'd be kind of fun to be able to see. I assume you all can see the comments. I really don't know. I'm on this end of it. But if So here's the question, and if you just would, you don't have to, but if you would just at least think through a few phrases or words and post a couple of them, we could see what your response is. Here's the question. Who are you? That's the question. Just let yourself just react to that. Who am I? And if you feel like posting that, go ahead and do that. And no, David, I'm not going to play guitar. So that's the question. Who am I? So I'll be honest with you. What comes to mind for me is when I typically introduce myself. Hi, my name is Paul Van Valen. I'm a psychologist. Or my name is Paul Van Valen. I'm the founder and owner of Eden Counseling and Consulting. That's kind of this typical social thing. And what we're doing is we're proclaiming, our name. This does define me. I have a unique name. In fact, any of you that meet a Van Valen, they are related. There is only one stream. There are many branches now, but they are related if you see that particular name. But we play different roles, right? I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a lover. I'm a friend. I'm a Christian. I'm a musician. So but most of what I listed are things we do or relationships that we have. So, I don't want to get real trite and simply lean on, well, you are God's child and that doesn't change. But I do want to talk about positional love. One of the tragedies that's taking place is that American Chinese are being persecuted right now, at least according to the media, if you can believe anything in the media. And that doesn't mean to slam all media, but just there's a lot, everybody's doing their best, and there's a lot of confusing news out there. But it makes sense to me that every culture who's in trouble tends to want to find somebody outside of themselves or someone they perceive as outside of themselves to blame. And so this has created great persecution and division throughout all of time. Chinese Americans are Americans. If they're American citizens, they're Americans. They happen to have come from China. We've seen this in World War II against Japanese Americans or anyone Asian that might look like they might have come from Japan. And so we as believers have to take a stand against this kind of blatant prejudice that takes place. If we really believe that God so loved the world, then he loved everybody. And that we have a call to support everybody, regardless of biases that may exist. So as we move through this, and I'm being distracted by things flying around here, the fluidity of who you are and how you feel about yourself, there's different ways to think about this. And so one of the things I'm going to share with you is I have a friend that's really brilliant. He's in England, and I haven't actually talked to him in a long time because we used to get together at certain conferences that no longer exist. But in the last time I spoke with him, he shared with me his recent thinking about people and organizations and teams and nations with two simple words: fragile and robust. And then I added another one in my thinking: maintaining. And so it's a simple model. You could say, where am I fragile? Where am I robust? And where am I maintaining? So who I am right now, and so what he said to me at the time, you are a robust leader, but this was early on in my organizational development, but your organization is fragile. And so you are at risk and your organization is at risk. You are a robust leader, but you have to figure out how to make your organization robust. And I would encourage you to use these thoughts as we're moving through this pandemic. Don't fall into denial. Denial is at one end and catastrophic, over-exaggerated thinking is the other end. Where is real? Where can we honestly say, look, I'm today physically healthy. The allergy symptoms are starting to come in. I'm just speaking, this is truth of me. So I have to be careful. I know with allergies comes susceptibility to colds, and I have a hearing condition, an inner ear condition that's developed, that colds can cause me all kinds of problems if it gets into the inner ear. So these are just realities I know about myself. And so the point is, we need to defend, we need to protect, we need to build up the fragile, but we need to go with the robust. And so for example, I hope I would do this. If I was really, really rich, I hope that I would be able to say, you send me any rationale for help that you need financially, and I'll write you a check for $10,000. Now, the really rich could do this. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm, putting blame on somebody that isn't doing this, but it's just an idea that I would have. So if I was really rich, I would have a lot of excess. I would have a lot of access to funds. And $10,000, that number came to mind. I thought, with that $10,000, A family, typical American family, could survive a long time. A community in a developing third world country could provide a long time. Again, I don't have that. I have some capital that comes in, intellectual capital, and I'm sharing that. But I want to challenge you. Am I a charitable person? Is that part of my identity? And another way to look at this is, what am I afraid to lose right now? And this may link to how you see yourself. If I'm afraid to lose money, what does that say about me in terms of my values? Lay up for yourself treasures in heaven, not on earth where moth and rust can corrupt. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So your identity, you can examine your identity in part by, what am I afraid of? And there was a time when I was really afraid of losing my reputation. I had started my company, and I didn't know what I was doing back in 1996. And so we got into financial trouble. I couldn't pay myself for 3 months. I started to think I need to quit this. And my wife, who is really strong, this is why we need each other, right? Back to yesterday's knowledge of self, knowledge of others, knowledge of God. So my wife says to me, well, didn't you get called into this? And I reviewed the miraculous stories of economic gifts that came in and the opportunities, and said, yeah, we were called into this. And then, so she said, well, have you been called out of it? And I said, no, haven't been called out of it. Well, then you just need to keep going. And she supported me, as did my accountant. My accountant said, what would you do if you could close down Eden, Paul? And I said, well, I'd go get a job with somebody else. What do you mean? You do the same thing for somebody else? Yeah, he says, build your own house. Figure out how to do it. So God forced me to learn how to develop myself. When we started Eden, I was a, good therapist, good psychologist. I wasn't a good business owner. And sometimes difficult times will force you to develop yourself, expand your identity, and become greater than who you are. My worst stories that I've recovered from with God's help become the basis for much of my teaching. And so, again, whatever you're going through right now, God has a plan for you. And no matter what you're going through, God expects you, wants you, in my opinion, based on my view of Scripture, to be generous, to be non-judgmental of others, to be non-critical, to be open to receiving others and figure out ways to bless them. And so again, my way has been, I'm opening up Facebook, I'm spending time as I've never spent before, trying to befriend those that may need an encouraging word that we all have to offer. So as we think about our identity changing, I'm reflecting on people I've talked to after 9/11 and who have really lost significantly. I talked to one uniformed personnel who lost multiple relatives, who were firefighters, who were police officers who happened to get trapped in the rubble, and the grief was really intense. And so so these are tips kind of also about how helping other people. So in dealing with this person, and it's a short encounter when you're in a crisis situation. I just said, so, I understand your grief. My mother, this was a true story. My mother died 3 weeks ago. And then we're both kind of tearing because we shared grief. Even though I wasn't part of his story, I had my own story and we could connect empathically. And then, I don't know what happens when a phone call comes in. A phone call just came in, that's why I reached for it. As I often do, I say, so what are you hoping will come from this? And then he stops and he says, I'm really hoping my kids will gain a perspective that's different than what we had. That they will live a life of generosity, of charity, they will care for others. And I said, I hope for that too. That sounds like a wonderful thing. And so these little brief encounters that you all can do now, just like that, encouraging each other, but you have to be connected. How are you doing? So when a new Facebook friend comes on, I ask, how are you doing? And then, what do you need? And then I can't promise to meet it, but I said, I will pray for you. I will attempt to connect you with people that might be able to help you. And that's what I have to offer. So you all could have that opportunity. You could be reaching out to each other. You could be asking how you're doing, and you will be practicing as best you can this part of charity, which needs to be part of the Christian identity, to be charitable. So I was also reflecting on losses in my life, my own life. I lost my mother in 2001. My father died in January of 2020. Does that mean I'm no longer a son? And what are the implications for that? I am now the patriarch. That's a significant shift in identity, right? And that's just the normal course of life. I was once a child. I was once a boy. I became a man. Hopefully I put away childish things. But what I wanted to get into today was what happens when the stuff that we use to define ourselves is really, really shaken. So and so what I was thinking of as I was thinking about this piece of this, I was in New Orleans, and after Katrina, and it was a good while after. I don't think we went down for 6 months, and yet utilities were still just gone. It was really almost scary to drive the highway from where we stayed, where they did have power and light, and Christian Broadcasting Network had set up an encampment in a mall, and we slept on 2x4 made bunk beds. Really interesting environment, fed by a big tent environment, and we would drive to the city, and there was just nothing alive, literally. I mean, just nothing. You didn't see hardly any wildlife in areas where there usually would be wildlife. Everything was just really strange looking. And then as you get to the city, you see these cars. It was late enough they'd gotten the cars out of the streets, but they were stacked up under the viaducts. It just kind of eerie, post-apocalyptic, kind of phenomenon. And so we were ministering to and working with a school, trying to help empower a school. And we went out to a meal, and our first reaction was to start grumbling because we're Americans. And so we sit down at this place, and the service is slow, and the food's not very good, and we're just kind of grumbling a little bit, staff unresponsive. And then, I can't remember who said it, might have been me, said, you know what? All these people are depressed. That's what's going on. All these people are depressed. And then we had different eyes, and we looked around, and sure enough, lifeless faces of people. And so that changed our perspective. They're doing the best that they can under the circumstances. These are fragile people, getting back to this other model, fragile people in a fragile environment doing the best they can. And so we over-tipped where our usual response would be to under-tip, but with a different perspective comes generosity. And that's a theme you're going to hear me talk about. I've really been struggling with how and what should I be generous with myself, given the resources that I've got. And I kind of want to lay it on you as you think about this. So I talk with people in these were the most stark experiences I've had of people who say they've lost everything. And the reason for that was these houses in certain of the districts were owned for generations by low-income families, paid for, uninsured. Simple wooden structures, and then when the lake dams gave way and the flood came in, they were uninhabitable. And many people lost 100% of their earthly possessions, 100% of their memorabilia, 100% of their physical structure, had no resources to rebuild, and they lost the lives of relatives. They really were experiencing what anyone would agree is devastation. And that, I mean, not just dealing with that and that intensity of emotion, but just the reality of who am I then? And I could see that they were lost, some, but not all. So here's this flip side of this. While I was working in this school, there were people serving us food and reasonably, given the climate, reasonably cheerful, reasonably gregarious. And so from these people, I heard the same stories. Some of them had just as much of a loss, but they were not immediately evidencing the depression that I know they were dealing with. And so I pondered that, and I began asking them, so how are you coping with this? And we happened to be working in a faith environment, so I heard a lot about, well, I believe that God is in control. I'm trying to live day by day. These are the common phrases I heard from many people. I'm trying to live day by day. I'm doing what I can to be helpful, and I feel good about that. And that's kind of one of the themes here. I'm doing what I can to be helpful. That's charity. That's generosity. That's courage. I define courage as doing the right thing when I don't feel like it. I'm going to repeat that. Courage is doing the right thing when I don't feel like it. So sometimes people give courageously of their time, of their resources. I think there are we need to really be thanking our medical personnel who don't feel like going into an environment where they may or may not be exposing themselves, therefore their whole family, to these things. These are courageous people. These are people with charitable spirit. They're giving what they can to this situation. And so these are honorable characteristics that God honors. But let's just get to another dimension. I'm an introvert. So I'm going to talk about personality in another one of these things. But so I'm an introverted personality. My wife is an extroverted personality. We're very different. So you might not think it when I'm doing this, but I am not a strong verbally expressive person. compared to what takes place in my head. I'm an internal processor. Some of you would relate to this. So, so my wife is an external processor and does a lot of talking. So, and so I have to be intentional. It's actually good for me. I have to be intentional about what I say, about what I do. That's part of who I am. As I get older, my concerns for me, what am I afraid of? I'm afraid of losing my capacity to think. That's what, I mean, if I have a fear, and I don't fear this every day, I'm afraid of losing my capacity to think. Other people whose identity is more tightly bound to earthly riches, they're afraid of losing their wealth. Other people are afraid of losing their health. That doesn't really scare me. I have been miraculously healed on 2 occasions. I have contemplated, how would I live if I went deaf? That's a possibility. And here's where denial actually comes in useful when we talk about denial. It is useful to have some element of denial when you have to keep moving. So what I say to myself, as long as I can speak and hear and think, I will communicate, I will do what I can to give to the world. If I lose the ability to hear, I will take up writing, which I've been wanting to do for a long time. But if I can't if I can't hear you, I'm going to write. And then for me, it really would be rough if my brain goes. I hope it goes far enough that it doesn't matter to me, because that's where I would be. I don't identify with wealth. I never have. It's not part of my heritage. I was asked by a financial planner a number of years ago, what are your financial goals? And I said, I want to pay for my last meal and die in my own bed. And he looked at our resources and said, well, assuming the stock market does what it's supposed to do, you don't have to do anything but sit back and let time go by. And we all know that hasn't worked out. I've seen 2 significant, now 3 significant rise and fall in the stock market because it's driven by emotional forces. So, but be that as it may, we got in the car and my wife said, well, this is great. We just need to keep going the way we're going. And I said to her, this is terrible. So this tells you what my identity. This is terrible. She says, what do you mean? There's no faith in this. There's no adventure. I mean, I just do what I'm doing until I die? No way. And then I took 6 months and I kind of prayed and fasted and got my friends together and they were praying for me. And then out came Eden Counseling and Consulting as a result of that, which has been a real adventure. It has driven me to my lowest lows and given me a platform to have experiences that I just have never thought imaginable. So why am I telling you all this stuff? I don't know. I'm sort of rambling right now, which kind of can happen. But I think where we're headed is I'm trying to share with you some principles that I have felt have been useful. Now, just because I say I don't really value wealth doesn't mean you shouldn't. I clearly have friends that have been called to manage vast amounts of resources, and the ones who are really putting those resources to good work are doing amazing things for the world. I also have friends who are generous, but they could afford to be more generous, and I don't judge them. But I think these are times when we all need to ask ourselves: Am I being generous enough? Am I a charitable person? So, part of what I wanted to touch on today was, where's your treasure? Where's your heart? And as your world is shaken, just ask the question. I don't really have answers for you. Who are you? You need to ask yourself, who am I? Do I have enough knowledge of me so that if you take everything away, I'm going to be okay? And none of us knows that till we're in that position. I've never been in that position. No one has ever taken everything away. But I have, like I said, I've talked to people who lost all material goods and their social support structure was destroyed. Family moved from New Orleans to Houston, very poor contact given that time. And I've seen the difference between robust people whose identity incorporates things that are unshakable, in this case their faith, and people whose identity was, from their perspective at least, totally in the relationships and stuff that was around them, and they felt stripped and naked and broken. I'm going to share with you as we close today, and I really don't know, give me some feedback on this. I started out with notes, and I don't think I've dealt with any of them. And so that's the risk of when you put me in front of a microphone. I may just ramble all over the place. But I do hope something of value came from this. I shared online a song I would like you to look this up. I mean, I think it's a beautiful song. If you like, you have to put up with the style being old man white music. But besides that, this is The Farthest Shore by David Wilcox. And the song tells the whole story. We were there in the woods by the water. We left our packs up against that willow tree. We dove right in, keeping just what we were born with, our memories, knowledge, and dreams. As I swam away from our possessions, I imagined they were gone forevermore. And for once I was glad that all I treasured would still be with me as I reached the other shore. So let me dive into the water, leave behind all that I've worked for, except what I remember and believe. And when I stand on the farthest shore, I will have all I need. After the blaze burned our cabin down to ashes, where we'd slept warm, now the sky lets in the rain. I found the strings, frets, and rusted latches, but I will never hear that old guitar again. These four walls are only in my memory, where these stone steps rise to nothing in the air. So one last look and I'm headed for the river to wash my hands and try to say this prayer. So let me dive into the water, leave behind all that I've worked for, except what I remember and believe. And when I stand on the farthest shore, I will have all I need. When my time to live this life is over, I'll tip my hat when I think about that swim. And of all the things that make a life worth living, that only come to those who dive right in. So let me dive into the water, leave behind all that I've worked for, except what I remember and believe. And when I stand on the farthest shore, I will have all I need. All I need. Let me dive into the water. It's all I need. So I'm going to close out for now. We'll be back tomorrow. I'll try to figure out what I'm supposed to talk about. I do appreciate your comments and questions. And if you have suggestions, at one point someone said, would you please talk about how to cope with isolation, which could be a possible topic. But if you have other ideas, let me know. And we will go along. The name of the song, Angie, is Farthest Shore. And if you go to my feed, you'll see a link to the YouTube where David Wilcox recording is, and you can view that. By the way, that album, Big Horizon, I love. I listened to it. I mean, it's an old album, but I listen to it several times a year. And once I listen to it once, I end up listening to it 2 or 3 times. So today I was playing it, the whole album, before coming here. Do share resources, in your conversations. What do you like? What are you reading? What are you listening to? What's uplifting? And we're a growing community. There are a number of people who view these posts. And let me encourage you, particularly you leaders, you're probably already doing this. Use all the social media you can. Give your stories, be encouraging, be authentic, be real. Next week, Bishop Courtney McBath and I are going to do a session for pastors. And when he did his first Facebook Live during this isolation period, 15,000 people were watching. So we may have an audience for that. And one of the things I'm thinking about doing is purchasing the webinar version of Zoom so that I can interview people on Facebook Live. I have some friends that I think would really have something to say. So let me see. I can't read. Ed sent me a note. I'll have to read that and comment on that later. It's too compressed. So I do ask for your suggestions, and we'll be talking soon. Those of you that find this a tolerable experience. Alrighty. Take care. Bye bye. Oops.